Joe Biden, with his infrastructure bill, is going to make major changes to the 1031, which has been an integral part of the real estate investors' strategy. The 1031 exchange has been around for about 100 years, and we're going to answer the question, is real estate dead if the 1031 exchange is changed with this infrastructure bill? Make sure to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot, and I'd be interested. Leave your comments in the comment section below. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on the matter. So let's go ahead and start with the 1031 exchange history. Let's start at the beginning. So in 1918, the Income Tax Act was instituted in order to gain revenue for World War I. And typically, governments will increase their need for revenue during wartime. So 1918 rolled around, they instituted the income tax. In 1921, we saw the 1031 exchange come about, and it was part of the Republican-led Revenue Act of 1921. So it has been around for about 100 years. Now that we're in October, very close to September 30th is when I'm making this video. It's been around for about 100 years. So now that we've got a little bit of the history, let's talk about why it was set up in place. So it's a way for real estate investors to transfer real property. Originally it did include private property as well, but in this case the 1031 exchange is for real property, and it's a way to exchange like for like. So for example, if a real estate investor lives in California and they decided to move to Texas, and let's say they have a single family home that is their primary residence, and they also have a rental property, let's say it's 6 units, okay? And so instead of being there in California and managing that, what they're gonna do is move over to Texas, and they're gonna take their 6-plex and maybe go buy a 10-plex in Texas so that they can be close, more localized to their investment property. Now this is what maybe a single investor would do, or a couple investor, but now the big institutional investors, what they'll do as well is they'll defer their taxes and continue to add value to the property. So for example, let's say a big investment property company, they buy a 100-unit apartment building that has deferred maintenance for $20 million. Then what they do is they go ahead and they add value to it, and they sell it for $25 million, let's say. Well, they can take that $25 million and roll it into a 200-unit apartment complex and continue getting that revenue as they add value. So it's a way for people, especially smaller investors, just mom and pop type investors, to grow and really build up their real estate portfolio and get income and defer their taxes. Now the reason this happens is because the investor never takes in the actual cash. So what they do is they put it into a qualified intermediary account, and that person exchanges it in for the other property that they're exchanging, right? So if they sold that 4-plex and bought a 6-plex, the investor actually never sees that money. And so that's one of the rationales for it and why it makes sense, because they actually never take that money. They never realize that capital gains. So there's a little history lesson and why it was set in place. Let's go ahead and talk about what changes Biden is wanting to make to the 1031 exchange. And now the 1031 exchange has been on the chopping block for a long time. Why? Annual volume of 1031 exchanges, about $100 billion, okay? So that's a lot of potential tax revenue. And as we know, the United States, the United States government, they want more taxes, and they need something to utilize that to spend into their different bills that they've got. So they want to get more taxes. That's their goal. So why are they wanting this? Obvious, tax revenue. But there's some other things that we need to take a look at here, and then we're going to get down to the bottom of what you should do as an investor and what this might do to impact real estate and what kind of real estate. Another component that they're talking about with this infrastructure bill is the capital gains. So they're going from 20% all the way up to 39%, which is a really significant jump, double almost, right? So how does the capital gains work? Well, if you are somebody who invests in the stock market, you know if you buy a stock for $100 and you sell it for $200, you're going to be taxed on that $100. Now, depending on how long you hold it, it'll be a long-term capital gains, or it'll be a short-term capital gains, okay? So we got to the history of it, we got to the reasons of it, the reasons that they're wanting to change it. Let's go ahead and get into the details of it. What they're communicating is that there's going to be a cap, and anything over is going to be taxed. $500,000 for an individual, $1 million for a couple. So let's go ahead and give a real-world example of what this means. So with the current proposed tax proposal, changes with the infrastructure bill, if a couple bought a property for $500,000 20 years ago and now it's worth $2 million, let's say hypothetically, they're able to take that $500,000, add $1 million to it, and then their increase, what could be considered capital gains, would be $500,000. So they would be taxed at 39%, depending on a couple other factors. Talk to your tax professional for tax advice. That's not what I'm offering here, but they would be taxed on that $500,000. Previously, and this is if they were doing an exchange and maybe exchanging that, $2 million into something that was a bigger property, right? Or they were moving to a different state and they wanted to exchange it to a more localized property. So previously, they would be able to exchange all of that, right? So if they bought a property for $100,000 and now it's worth $10 million, they would be able to sell that, put it into a qualified intermediary account, and then go ahead and purchase something else, and they would defer their taxes. Eventually, they would have the taxes, but it's a deferment program because they're saying, hey, we're not actually taking that cash out, we're just exchanging like for like. We're just saying, hey, we want to sell our fourplex here, and we want to buy this fourplex over there, and we're just exchanging. We're not taking that money out, right? We're not realizing that capital gains. $500,000 for an individual, $1 million for a couple, right? Now that seems like a lot. It is for the most part. Here in California, you're oftentimes going to see that type of an increase because we do live in a place where the appreciation can be high. In other states, might be a little bit more uncommon, right? So what this means for the individual owner who maybe purchased a few years ago, probably not a whole lot because they haven't seen that kind of capital gains and that increase in value. However, for somebody who has held their real estate portfolio for a while, they are going to be fairly heavily hit right when they go and exchange their property, and it can be really significant amount. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of what we're dealing with here, right? It's a way to defer your taxes, and it's a way to build out your real estate portfolio, especially for real estate investors that are looking to do a flip and then flip that into something else. Now, it does have to be an income producing property. There are types of investment properties that it does not pertain to, and the flip would be one of them, but there are some circumstances where it could be, but it needs to be a particular type of investment property. Effects, and what I think that's going to do for investors. Now, what I think is going to happen is a big investor that buys multi-million-dollar commercial properties, large apartment properties, they're going to be more hesitant to, one, sell and buy, right? So if, let's say, a big institutional investor buys an apartment building off 100 units for $20 million and it increases in value to $22 million, well, they're going to be taxed quite a bit on that difference at $2 million, right? Now, if they take that money and they, let's say, sell it in the next couple months, because we're filming this in September, if they sell that, what I would do if I was advising them is I'd probably go into smaller units, right, that are not going to see that large amount of increase. So let's say you have one 100 unit apartment complex, right, and it increases just 10%, right? So 10% of $20 million, that's $2 million. However, let's say you bought 20 duplexes, right? Now each one of those duplexes, say they increased 10%. Let's say you bought them for $1 million and they increased to $1.1 million. you're not going to be taxed on that. That's still going to count for that $500,000 exemption, right, for the 1031 exchange. So what would you rather do? You'd rather have 30 duplexes that will increase by $100,000 each, and then you can exchange them and move them around. However, that big apartment complex, it might not be as attractive as it used to be. So that's one thing to keep in mind. What that's going to do, in my opinion, is it's going to put upward pressure on the smaller type units, the single family homes, the duplexes, the triplexes, the quadplexes, those types of properties. Also, what I think it's going to do is it's going to instigate investors to sell more frequently. So let's say there's an increase in the market for investment properties, let's say a duplex or a triplex. You bought it a few years ago, it's increased in value by $300,000, $400,000, and you go, uh-oh, I'm seeing this $500,000 getting pretty close. I want to get this sold and move on to the next one, right? And so it may deter people from holding on to real estate investment properties for extended periods of time and letting that increase really become quite astronomical. For example, if somebody purchased back in the 80s or 90s and they've held their investment properties for a long time and it's increased over that $500,000 or $1 million as a couple, then they're going to have some really hefty tax burdens, that 39%. So I think that it's going to accelerate the buying and selling of multifamily or other type of properties that are relevant to the 1031 exchange. And I think it's going to potentially put some stagnation in the big commercial type units, like maybe hotels or shopping centers or very large apartment buildings that are going to be taking in a lot of that extra 1031 exchange. So I think that what we're going to see here, and what my play would be, is if you have a chance to really start looking at the different properties that maybe have the potential of that $500,000 or $1 million amount, right? And to try and buy those up and encourage the sellers to sell to you if you are a buyer, or and if you're a seller, then make sure that you sell before that $500,000 mark or $1 million mark. So I don't think it's all bad. I do think that it's going to really damage and stagnate some of the real estate market, and it's going to be quite a bumpy ride for a few people, especially people that have held investment real estate for a long time, or that hold really large investment portfolios of large type buildings. But I think the value is going to be in those smaller units, those duplexes and those single family homes, but that is going to increase the price of those, because you're going to see, I think, more money moving towards that for the reasons that I explained. So, like I said, take a look at that as being a potential strategy to avoid this. Diversify and get down to smaller units and more of them versus bigger units, right? And so the 1031 exchange really encouraged people to build up, right? To go from duplexes to fourplex to 10plex to 30plex, right? And to continue to defer their capital gains and to build their portfolio. And I think this now is going to encourage people to, like I said, sell sooner before they reach that mark of $500,000. So that's what I think. Lastly, I think that the new builds are going to potentially be a case here. So let's say there's a big institutional investor, right? And they invest in real estate, right? So I think there's going to be some stagnation in the larger units, right? The 30, 40 unit or 100 unit apartment complexes. And what I think they're going to do, because nobody wants to sell it and incur all of that capital gains taxes, right? The owners of that, I think what it's going to potentially do is encourage new multifamily builds. So if you're, say for instance, like a BlackRock or something, or somebody sold their stock portfolio and they're moving it into real estate, they're not going to have, I think, as many options to buy non-new properties, but they are going to see some more opportunities potentially in new builds, just to open up some of that inventory. What do you guys think? I'd be interested to hear what your guys' thoughts are on the 1031 exchange infrastructure bill changes that the Biden administration is proposing. Like I said, I think there's opportunity for everybody. If you You have to think strategically. Those are just some of my ideas. I may have missed some, so leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd be interested to read them and reply. Please like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Hope you all have a great day. Talk to you later.